I want you to just imagine for a second walking into a major investment bank.
Okay.
You sit down across from the underwriting syndicate, and you tell them that you need to raise cash.
Right.
But when they ask how much, you don't say $1 billion. You don't even say, like, $10 billion.
No, you definitely don't.
You look them in the eye and say, I need $75 billion.
Yeah.
And you need the market to absorb all of that in a single coordinated offering.
I mean, it is just a figure that completely warps the traditional physics of capital markets, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
At that scale, you are no longer just floating a company. You are attempting to alter the actual gravitational pull of global liquidity.
Which is wild. So welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is to unpack the confidential, record-breaking IPO filings of Elon Musk's SpaceX.
Right.
We're looking really closely at the documents recently submitted to the SEC by the Starbase, Texas-based company.
Yeah, and it's fascinating stuff.
It really is. But the goal here isn't just to, gawk at the sheer number.
Right.
We are taking you behind closed doors to decode the mechanics of how a transaction of this magnitude is even physically possible.
Exactly.
And we really want to explore the high-stakes negotiations happening right now with major global financial players, just to keep the whole thing from collapsing under its own weight.
Because to truly parse what SpaceX is engineering here, we really have to examine this at the intersection of aerospace innovation and, well, sovereign wealth strategy.
Yeah.
We are looking at a private entity attempting a market entry that forces us to completely reevaluate the upper limits of what global financial markets can actually handle.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Let's look at the mechanics of this $75 billion target. Because to understand the strategy they're deploying behind the scenes, we really first have to ground ourselves in just how unprecedented that number is.
Oh, it's staggering.
We are talking about rewriting the historical record books by just an astonishing margin.
We really are. If you look at the historical data, the mega IPO giants of the modern era, they don't even come close to this territory.
Not even close.
Right. So Saudi Aramco held the crown when it went public back in 2019.
Right.
And they raised roughly $29.4 billion.
Which at the time was massive.
Exactly. And before that, Alibaba held the record with a $25 billion raise in 2014.
Okay, so if SpaceX successfully hits the $75 billion target, I mean, they aren't just beating the record.
No.
They are effectively tripling the Alibaba benchmark.
Tripling it, yeah.
But, I mean, let's be real here. Those previous record holders were fundamentally different beasts, right?
Absolutely.
Aramco is a state-owned oil giant generating just unimaginable free cash flow from a proven global commodity.
Right.
And Alibaba was dominating the digital commerce space in the world's most populous country.
They were known, highly predictable cash engines.
Exactly, whereas SpaceX is asking for triple the capital to fund, like, the most capital-intensive, high-risk physical engineering projects in human history.
And that distinction is crucial,
Yeah.
You are asking investors to underwrite deep space architecture, orbital logistics, massive manufacturing footprints.
It's like comparing building a skyscraper to building a space elevator.
That's a great way to put it. The risk profile is entirely different from a consumer software platform or a petroleum reserve.
Right. Which brings up a really serious mechanical problem.
Right.
Like, let's use an analogy here. If you think of global market liquidity as a valley, a standard tech IPO is like opening a small dam.
Sure.
The water flows in, the market absorbs the new shares, and the ecosystem just balances out.
Naturally, yeah.
But trying to raise $75 billion all at once is like instantly vaporizing the Hoover Dam.
Yes.
If you just dump that much stock onto the open market on launch day, you completely flood the valley.
You would.
You overwhelm the buy-side demand, and the stock price collapses immediately.
It would just tank.
Exactly. So my question is, how do you prevent that flood? Are they just testing the waters here, or is the market actually deep enough for this?
Well, what's fascinating here is that you cannot rely on the open market for this.
Right.
And you certainly cannot rely on retail investors or standard momentum to swallow that kind of offering.
That makes sense.
If you want to move $75 billion without crashing your own valuation,
Yeah.
you have to build massive diversion channels long before the floodgates even open.
Okay, so how do they do that?
You pre-sell the offering through cornerstone investors.
Ah. And this is where the confidential filings become incredibly revealing, right?
Exactly.
Because for an IPO of this scale, The underwriting banks are quietly locking in these cornerstone players.
Massive institutional funds.
Right, and they commit to absorbing huge guaranteed blocks of shares at a fixed price before the executives even start their traditional roadshow.
Yeah, exactly. By the time they're pitching mutual funds, the roadshow basically becomes a formality. Because by the time the wider market is invited to participate, the bedrock of the capital raise is already secured.
So they've already got the cash spoken for.
Right. The underwriting syndicate is essentially constructing this multi-tiered allocation model.
Okay.
The cornerstone giants take the massive foundational chunks, which then gives the banks the confidence to allocate the remaining portions to high net worth individuals and standard institutional funds.
Right, because they know the floor price is fully protected.
Precisely.
But, I mean, the cornerstone strategy only works if the players involved have absolutely bottomless pockets.
Absolutely.
And the specific negotiations taking place right now highlight just how extreme the scale of this operation really is.
Yeah, it's wild.
The documents reveal that Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the PIF, is currently in talks to take roughly a $5 billion stake in this IPO.
Yeah, $5 billion from a single sovereign wealth fund.
Just one fund.
In the vast majority of corporate scenarios, a $5 billion check buys you a controlling interest.
Oh, for sure.
Or, at the very least, a highly influential, table-pounding seat on the board of directors.
Wait, let me stop you right there because I'm just running the mental math on this right now.
Okay.
The filings indicate that this $5 billion move by the PIF is entirely defensive.
Yes.
Like, it's merely to prevent dilution and maintain their current, slightly sub 1% ownership stake.
Exactly.
So wait, if $5 billion only buys you roughly 1%, that means this IPO is valuing SpaceX at $500 billion.
Yep.
Are we actually looking at an implied $500 billion valuation?
We absolutely are. The math points directly to an enterprise valuation in the neighborhood of $500 billion.
A $500 billion aerospace company. That is just, it's wild.
It is staggering. And that figure is exactly why this specific negotiation with the PIF is so essential to the structural integrity of the whole IPO.
I mean, it's essentially like paying a $5 billion cover charge at an exclusive club just to keep the tiny VIP table you already had.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. You aren't getting a bigger table. You aren't getting extra bottle service. You are dropping $5 billion simply to exercise your pro rata rights so your slice of the CAC table doesn't get mathematically crushed.
Right, when all these new shares are issued.
Right.
And, the psychology of that move really cannot be overstated.
Why is that?
From a market mechanics perspective, securing this specific commitment anchors the entire $500 billion valuation.
Ah, I see.
Sovereign wealth funds are notoriously sophisticated.
Right.
They are deeply analytical.
Yeah, they don't just throw money away.
Exactly. So when the rest of the financial world, the pension funds, the asset managers, the family offices, when they see the PIF willing to deploy $5 billion just to tread water at a fraction of a percent,
it validates the pricing model.
it completely validates it.
It signals that the smartest, deepest pools of capital in the world have already looked at the books.
Right?
They've run the projections, and they've decided that a $500 billion valuation is not just defensible, but desirable.
Exactly. It manufactures scarcity and drives up demand for the remaining retail allocation.
It creates this powerful herd mentality among institutional investors.
It really does.
Yeah.
But we also have to recognize that the PIF's willingness to defend its position in SpaceX isn't happening in, like, an aerospace vacuum.
Right. It's bigger than just rockets.
The sovereign wealth funds don't usually isolate their exposure like that. They look for systemic integration.
And my theory here is that we aren't just looking at an isolated rocket company going public.
No.
We are looking at a deeply intertwined financial relationship between the Saudi fund and Elon Musk's broader commercial ecosystem.
Yeah, that's the real story.
The PIF isn't just buying equity in a company. I mean, they seem to be actively securing an index fund of a single founder's entire technological stack.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it.
Right.
Because the timeline of their investments over the past year reveals a highly deliberate strategy. They are embedding themselves across multiple verticals within that ecosystem. If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the events detailed in the documents, starting in late 2025, the pattern becomes undeniable.
Well, let's walk through that timeline for a second, because it really connects the dots between space exploration and artificial intelligence.
Yes.
So, in November 2025, the PIF's artificial intelligence subsidiary, Humane,
Right.
they announced a massive collaboration with Musk's AI venture, XAI.
Yep.
And this wasn't just like a basic software licensing deal or a shared research initiative.
No, not at all.
They announced a collaboration to deploy 500 megawatts of data center capacity in Saudi Arabia.
Right. And just to put that in perspective, 500 megawatts of continuous power demand is an industrial footprint on the scale of a mid-sized city.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It requires dedicated substations, advanced cooling infrastructure, massive tracts of land.
It's not just plugging in some servers.
No, building that kind of facility is a multi-billion-dollar undertaking that fundamentally alters an entire region's power grid.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why is an aerospace IPO heavily dependent on a sovereign wealth fund that is simultaneously building a mid-sized city's worth of power infrastructure for an AI company?
Right.
Like, how do those gears actually turn together?
Well, think about it this way. Compute power is the ultimate bottleneck for advanced technological development right now.
Okay.
If you are building autonomous orbital logistics systems or training neural networks to land deep space rockets, you need an incomprehensible amount of processing power.
Right, which takes huge amounts of energy.
Exactly. XAI requires the physical, energy-dense infrastructure that a partner like the PIF can facilitate on a sovereign level.
Oh.
In return, the PIF gets foundational access to the underlying AI models that will likely power the next generation of global logistics.
And the financial pipeline between these entities is just wide open.
Cool.
Because following that November announcement, the documents show the PIF pumped another $3 billion via Humane directly into the XAI ecosystem in March 2025.
Right.
And that happened right before XAI merged with the social media platform X.
Right. And that merger is really the final piece of the structural puzzle here.
How so?
Well, you have X providing the real-time global data stream, right?
Yeah, the text, the video, the human interaction.
Exactly. You have XAI processing that data to train frontier models.
Right.
You have the PIF funding the massive data center infrastructure in Saudi Arabia to physically run those models.
Okay.
And finally, you have SpaceX, which is now launching the orbital communications backbone via Starlink that can seamlessly connect that entire global architecture.
It's an entirely closed-looped technological empire.
It really is.
You've got social media for data acquisition, artificial intelligence for cognitive processing, sovereign wealth for physical energy infrastructure, and aerospace for global distribution. So when the PIF negotiates a $5 billion check to maintain their sub 1% stake in SpaceX, they are basically protecting their equity in the distribution layer of an ecosystem they have already heavily subsidized at the data and compute layers.
That's exactly right. They are hedging their bets across the entire value chain.
Wow.
From a macroeconomic perspective, sovereign wealth funds like the PIF have a mandate to transition their national economies away from legacy commodities like oil.
Right. They need to move into the infrastructure of the future.
Exactly. And by anchoring themselves across Musk's entire portfolio, they are essentially buying a foundational stake in the operating system of the mid-21st century.
And for SpaceX, I mean, the benefit is equally systemic.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't aim for a $75 billion raise just to optimize your supply chain or, like, build a few more launch pads.
No, you ask for $75 billion because you are trying to change the paradigm of human logistics.
Right. And having a backer that is fully integrated into your AI and data infrastructure provides this massive moat that standard public market competitors simply cannot replicate.
The capital efficiency alone is just staggering.
Yeah.
When the constituent parts of an ecosystem can share data, compute power, and sovereign financial backing, the valuation of the overarching entity, in this case, the impending SpaceX IPO, starts to look less like a speculative bubble and more like a massive infrastructure bond.
Which makes this pre-IPO phase so critical for you to keep an eye on.
Definitely.
We are watching the absolute upper limits of global financial markets being stress tested in real time.
Real time.
Let's briefly recap the core takeaways we've explored today.
Sure.
We have SpaceX aiming for a history-making $75 billion capital raise, which is an amount that requires carefully coordinated diversion channels so it doesn't flood the market.
Right. We observed how cornerstone investors secure the floor of the offering, highlighted by the PIF's ongoing negotiation, to deploy $5 billion purely defensively.
Just to hold on to their spot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Implicitly anchors that massive $500 billion enterprise valuation for SpaceX.
And crucially, we've connected the dots to show that this aerospace IPO is deeply integrated into a wider closed-loop system encompassing XAI, 500-megawatt data centers, and the X platform.
All underwritten by a strategy of sovereign wealth integration.
Right.
And, understanding these dynamics is essential for anyone tracking the future of capital markets.
Oh, 100%.
The mechanics of this IPO are basically forcing the world's deepest pockets to coordinate and fund the most capital-intensive private projects in human history.
Yeah.
It sets a completely new precedent for how mega-cap companies will bypass traditional market limitations.
It really is a masterclass in financial engineering.
It is.
We started this deep dive imagining the sheer audacity of walking into a room and asking for $75 billion.
Right.
But looking at the dense web of AI, data centers, and sovereign partnerships supporting that ask, it leaves me with a final thought for you to just sort of chew on.
Let's hear it.
If a single private company's ecosystem has grown so vast and so capital-intensive that it requires the coordinated financial backing of entire nations just to go public,
Yeah.
how long before the lines between corporate tech empires and national economies disappear entirely?
Wow. That is a profound shift in the balance of global economic power.
Something to seriously consider the next time you hear about a record-breaking valuation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.